once again, it's Jonathan Herbst from Scale Up Growth Partners. Welcome to our Stories of Scaling Up series, where we're chatting with owners, managing directors, founders, and business leaders of scaling companies. It centres around their entrepreneurial journey so far and their aspirations for the companies. Today, we're speaking to Mark Gell, who's a director and co-founder of Reputation Edge. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Really, I very much appreciate you taking the time, Mark, to join us.
It's a pleasure.
So how about we start? Can you tell us what you do, what Reputation Edge does, please?
Well, we set up Reputation Edge in 2010. The purpose of it is to provide companies, corporates, individuals with reputation management advice. We cover everything from clients like Volvo, Ampol, Wally, the Olympics, startups. We have a broad range of clients. And the reason we have a broad range of clients is because of the way we established the business in the first place 12 years ago.
Great. And so what exactly does Reputation Edge do?
Look, there's no simple answer to that. Look, it depends on, for Volvo, for example, one of our partners provides them with PR and media support. So when they do car launches and when they win awards for their cars and so on and so forth, he maximises the coverage of those events. Wally, for example, which is one of the clients I've been working with for the last 8 years, I do advice around media and advice around the equity market side of things or the investor relations side of things. Ampol, I do work around the investor relations side of things. We've done CEO transitions, for example, where companies are looking to transition from one CEO to the next, sometimes quite abruptly. We've done several of those. We've worked with the chartered accountants in Australia when they did the merger between Australia and New Zealand. In a couple of cases, we've actually joined the internal staff as project directors to assist in major stakeholder exercises. For example, the Kurnell refinery shutdown. So we do a lot of different things. We have a partner who provides advice to a lot of startups, for example.
And let's think there for a moment if we can. I think the majority of my followers are startups, scale-ups, up to 250, to 500 staff type thing. How would you work with startups and scale-ups?
Well, one is making sure they get some cut through in terms of building up their profile as to what they're doing. The growth in startups is quite phenomenal. Every day you see a new startup coming out saying we can do this and we can do that. One of the partners does a lot of work around the prop tech, for example. I was actually a COO of a prop tech myself back in 2014-15. And the sort of advice verges on two different sort of styles of advice. Reputation Edge, it's about actually managing and building the profile of those particular startups so they get noticed. On the other side of things, on the advisory board of things, what we do is help startups actually structure correctly to ensure that they can, one, grow, two, understand their market, understand their business, understand their commercials, and then get themselves into a position where they can scale. And then the third element of that, in the process of setting up a VC fund called Gell Capital, which is about funding those organisations that already have revenue and have good margin, but are having difficulty getting the capital to scale.
Right. So, I mean, it sounds. I mean, it's almost like everything from a PR through disaster recovery. The whole gamut of areas.
Well, it is. But if I was to take the one key ingredient of all these various elements, it's stakeholder engagement.
Right.
All right. So whether it be with your customers, whether it be with your suppliers, other companies, your market, the media, The one key element here is working out who your key stakeholders are, what impact they have on the value proposition that you're trying to put out there in the marketplace, and then navigating that world.
Great. That's a great summary if we really think about it. Okay. Can I switch tacks a bit? We've all been through the pandemic. What things have you? What are some of the strategies that you implemented during the pandemic that have stuck with the business and you're carrying forward in your business?
Look, I think the pandemic accelerated digitization and the application of digitization to the workplace, and we're no different. So what we've been doing is assisting organisations with that process. We're building digital studios ourselves. Just the mere fact we're having this interview, for example, is a good sign that we've come out of the pandemic. Everyone's going digital. Now, there's some good sides and there's some bad sides to that. Everybody's becoming an expert. And everyone puts themselves out there as an expert. But in my view, and I've been working for some 40-odd years now, to be an expert, you have to actually have been around the mill. And one of the key things that our business right across the board provides, we call it, we've been in your shoes. We've been here. I mean, I've worked in large corporates on senior management teams for 20-odd years. I've had agencies for 15-odd years, and the other 5 years was in politics. So we have a very, very broad base of experiences to actually bring to clients in providing the counsel that we provide.
It's interesting you say that. When people ask me, what are the key skills I bring? And one of those key skills is I've probably made every mistake as a CEO that's possible to make on the way through, and learn from that. And my team of coaches are the same. We draw from experienced CEOs who've been there, done that, made mistakes, and learnt and moved on. So I get that totally. What does the future look like for you, and what challenges do you see coming down at you in the future?
Yeah, look, that's a really, really good question, because we're going into, if you have a look at information in the last 10 years, they're saying that information generally has increased 50-fold. So through the digitization process and the internet, people have access to information. In the next 3 years, they're saying that that's going to increase by another 100-fold. So it's growing exponentially. So people are getting extremely confused. You can access information, the old expression, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You can access a whole pile of information that validates any side of any argument these days. So people are getting confused, and in that confusion, they're losing sight of the basics. So while I think digitization is a fantastic thing, learning how to use the process of digitization to meet your end strategic goals, I think is going to be key. So I think we're going to go through a phase where people are going to bite off a whole pile of different experiences to try and get their head around the various confusion that's out there. But bringing that back to what are the basics and what are the basics of business, and then how do you promote that, I think is still relevant today and into the future. It has been in the last 30 or 40 years. The only difference these days is markets are changing radically. The ability to access large banks of customers is now there that you couldn't do before. And you have to use digitization to do that.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And a good example of that is, as you mentioned earlier, is just this call. Reaching out a very simple way via LinkedIn to connect with aggressive CEOs to do this series. Biggest learning since you've become a business owner?
Yours?
Your biggest learning since becoming a business owner?
The biggest learning. Look, the way we set up Reputation Edge really taught me a lot, because we set it up in such a way Your traditional professional services business is a 30-30-30 split, roughly. So 30% overhead, 30% salary, 30% profit. We take home 90% of what we bring in. So we tip the model up on its head. Now, we did that because we wanted to do that. We wanted maximum flexibility. And we were able to achieve that. And we grew, we were the fastest growing agency of its type in the first year and the second fastest growing agency of its type in the second year. The next question for us is, it's not the model that everyone likes either. So we changed the business model quite radically. We don't have debt, we don't have obligations, we don't have any of that sort of thing. So there's a certain amount of freedom around that. And we're also free to look at other things as well in terms of individual partners getting involved in other things. So you get a really good balance. You make as much as you put in. So there's a real return for effort type equation in doing that. So that taught me a lot, because it actually got me focused very heavily on cash and how important cash is to businesses. And a lot of people don't see through that. A lot of people that we've worked with around startups don't use their cash wisely, and as a result get themselves in trouble, and don't plan ahead when they sit there. For example, it takes 6 months to raise capital. So you've got to look out 18 months and say, okay, at this period we need to do the run up to raising capital. And you need to really understand your business and understand the needs of those that are providing capital to be able to raise it. And so many times I've seen, I call it the founder's dilemma, where the founder is more focused in terms of importance on the technical solution rather than the commercials of the business.
And you're absolutely right. Growth sucks cash. And if you don't have that plan in place, well in advance, it's one of the key reasons startups and scale-ups fail.
That's exactly right. And when you look at the reputation edge side of promoting businesses,
yes,
if you promote businesses really successfully, they could end up with a problem where they're not actually supplying quality product or services based on that growth, which means they then need capital to bring in the fill in behind. So this is where we, on the one end, we're helping promote these sort of businesses, and on the other end, we're making sure that they have the right sort of structures in place to be able to deliver on what's being promoted. Because if they don't, they're going to create an issue for themselves, and they're going to run out of capital very quickly, because all of a sudden, I need $500,000 to be able to deliver on this growth that I've got coming in through the front door at the moment. I've seen, there's one business we're working with at the moment, and I do mentoring with this business, and they're very, very good at digital marketing. So good that the principal of this digital marketing business brings piles of business through the door. What they're finding is that they have to work through the night because the staff aren't providing the quality of the work that's required to meet the demands. So they've created a really good issue to have. But the next question is, well, how are you going to manage this growth?
Yeah.
You need someone that sits behind you that actually brings it together, pulls all the strings together and makes sure that the work's getting delivered to a certain quality so you don't lose these customers. I mean, we've had, for example, going back to Reputation Edge, Volvo's been on our books, I think, almost 8 years. Wally's been on our books almost 8 years. I have another client that I first started working with in 2012 that's moved companies, and I've moved with them. So it's, building quality work is just as important as winning the work. And that equation's often forgotten.
Absolutely. It's that dilemma of and it's hard of how do you actually document, and execute on the processes that actually ensures that you get the quality at all times as the company grows. It's really hard to do.
It is very.
So tell me, when you think of the word successful, who springs to mind first?
That's a really that's a really difficult question. I mean, I'll try and answer it this way. I started writing a book about 3 years ago on the philosophy of leadership, and I went and interviewed a whole pile of people that I've come across in my career, heads of state, Olympians, and so on and so forth. Success to me is not one single thing. How you define success for yourself is more important than taking on what the world tells you success is. Because if you take on what the world tells you what success is, you may not actually live by your own values in trying to achieve what the world's telling you success looks like. And ultimately, in my view, success is happiness, isn't it, really? So you've got to be happy with yourself and what you're doing. Doesn't matter how much money you make or how little money you make, as long as you feel the happiness about what you're achieving. To me, that is success.
You know, that question is my favourite question of the 10 questions I'm asking. And of the interviews we've done so far, the answers have been phenomenal. And that was another one. So thank you for that, because it's worth jumping into the videos and having a listen. You know, we've had everything from your view, which I totally agree with, through to Tom Cruise, through to A Gentleman's Grandfather, it's really interesting where how that's been answered. So worth having a look at. So tell me, top 3 business books, biographies, podcasts that you might recommend?
Yeah, I've done, because I've been doing, I've out and interviewed all these leaders that I've come across over time. I've actually delved into in the last 2, and because of COVID and being in lockdown, I've actually delved into watching current affairs a lot more closely. And because I think we're going through a really interesting period in history, particularly in the US. We're seeing a change in geopolitics, and we're seeing the growth of China. We're seeing Russia, challenging the West. We're seeing I'll call it a philosophical shift in the US, away from what traditionally the US has been built upon. So it's been a very interesting period, but I've been looking at it through the lens of leadership and the development of narratives, which goes back to the reputation edge side of the business, and how the fact-based world, which the West has really been built upon, institutions, fact-based, looking at data, interpreting that data and making decisions, to all of a sudden swinging towards, my emotions are just as important as the facts. And I've always been schooled in, where's the evidence? Go and look at the evidence and see what the evidence says. Don't jump to a conclusion, because you can make a big mistake. Also being schooled in, don't allow your emotions to get in the way of very important decisions, because your emotions are a roller coaster, and you're going to make roller coaster decisions. So on that note, when I look at literature, and over the 40 years of reading philosophy literature and things like that, I read a lot of Paul Johnson, for example, who wrote a book called Intellectuals, and a book on the history of the modern world, and a book on history of the Jews. And he's a writer who's a journalist historian, and you can only read 10 to 20 pages at a time, because it's so factually dense that it really gets you thinking and analysing. I think the art of critical thinking, I think, is dying, and because of that, applying critical thinking to what you see that's going on in the world now and how it's reported, I think is extremely important. We're seeing an explosion in books, written by ghostwriters and so on and so forth. So, what do you read that is anchored in fact these days is really difficult. I remember the first. I'm sure you probably remember the first big executive book that came out called In Search of Excellence, and everyone read In Search of Excellence.
Yeah.
Are there any groundbreaking cornerstone books in the business world these days? I don't know. I can't think of any.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it's I think there's 2 points you brought up. One is that digitalization and things like Facebook and the like. Once you express an opinion, you almost get led down, further polarizing information that confirms your opinion, if that makes sense. So I think that's a major problem. But on books, I really work a lot on the theory of keep it simple. Patrick Lencioni is an author that I recommend to all of my clients. A couple of his books, particularly the five dysfunctions of a team. Bringing things back to, I think that's even though it's a short fable, it's so powerful. I think there are some, but probably not to the extent of Tom Peters and In Search of Excellence. But a lot of those classics so totally apply now.
It's interesting because those books were written at a time. If you have a look at the Dow Jones and who are the top 20 companies on the Dow Jones now compared to 20 years ago, they're all tech companies, right?
Yeah. Just look at the fact that where General Electric is now.
Yeah, well, that's Controlling Your Own Destiny by Jack Welch, which was a very interesting read. I think business. There are a couple of fundamental things. Business principles haven't changed. It's the way you deliver. Well, the way you access customers has changed.
Yes.
The way you deliver products has changed. So, but the basic principles of corporate governance, good cash management, commercials, incentive structures, all those sort of things haven't.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's, but, and this is the but, I've really delved into digitization in a big way, which is again coming out of COVID. What's his name? There was a professor who was president of Armenia, I think it was, Suskeson, he was a quantum physicist, and he was the first leader in the world who was a quantum physicist. And he says, what we're seeing at the moment reflects quantum physics. And he said one of the best proponents of that was Donald Trump using Twitter. Because what he knew is he put an explosion out there. And, if you go back to the art of war, this is a classic tactic of the art of war. You confuse the living daylights out of people. You get them talking about, what a crazy person he is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a whole bunch of people who will sit there and go, well, wait a minute, I align with that.
Yeah.
And he used it in a quantum physics sort of way, and Twitter allows that, and the internet allows that. So how you learn and utilize those sort of tools in this day and age is extremely different to what it was 20-odd years ago.
Agreed. Any last piece of advice or parting words for CEOs or upcoming CEOs that you'd give?
Stay grounded. Stay grounded. You mentioned one of the key principles I tell people: let's keep it simple. Don't get complex. Go to the data. Don't ask how people feel about things. Go to the data, assess the data, and then determine how you feel about things. Ultimately, business is about hard work and data and what your gut's telling you, because ultimately you know that if something doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't. I was lucky as a child to grow up with my godparents were the people who bought Dry-as-a-Bone in 1972, I think it was. Right. They bought it for a very low 6-figure sum and then sold it for an 8-figure sum a couple of decades later, or less than that, 15 odd years later. I learned a lot from those people. I can remember my godfather who was deteriorating health-wise, could still tell me the cost of sewing on a button on a particular garment. He had that knowledge. His wife was the finance person. She managed all the books, and the son was the marketing person. They just kept it really basic. It was a family business, but it set off an international fashion trend that put that business on the map. So sticking to the basics and understanding your business is just so important.
Fabulous. Mark, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. And very broad ranging, but lots of great material for CEOs out there. So thanks.
No, thank you. Thanks for your time.